Hi, I want to talk about Aristotle on substance. Aristotle's categories give us 10 modes of being, the most fundamental, the primary one of which is substance. Everything else is really a quality of a substance, a quantity of a substance, a relation between substances, and so on. So substance is fundamental. But what is substance? We've talked some about criteria for identifying substances. Substances can admit contrary qualities. They don't themselves have contraries. A substance is a this such. It's this particular example of a certain more general kind. And there are a variety of others. But what does that really mean for what substance is and what kinds of things are substances? You might think, look, I know already everything I need to know about this. Substances are, in the primary sense, particular things. And then in the secondary sense, kinds of thing. End of story. Well, not quite. And Aristotle goes into, in great detail, in one of the books of the Metaphysics, known as Metaphysics Zeta, about what it really means for something to be a substance and what substance really is. It turns out the picture is complicated. My only incomplete that I received during my graduate education was in a course on Aristotle. I took on the problem of explaining Aristotle's analysis of substance in Metaphysics Zeta as the topic for my term paper. I couldn't finish it within the semester, and I figured, well, I'll write it over the summer. Over the summer, I studied the question, I read more and more about it. Finally, I became convinced I couldn't solve the problem. And so quickly shifted my topic to Aristotle on infinity and wrote a paper about that, which was not exactly my greatest work. But that problem about substance, I in the end considered insoluble. And as you'll see today, I have more ideas about it, but actually I think still Aristotle's point in a way is nothing really fulfills all of the considerations, all of the criteria intuitively that we have for being a substance. Why is it complicated? Well, let's start our discussion by reminding ourselves about the role that substance plays in the categories. Expressions that are in no way composite signify substance: quantity, quality, relation, place, time, position, state, action, or affection. Those are the basic categories. Substance, in the truest and primary and most definite sense of the word, is that which is neither predicable of a subject nor present in a subject. And so all of those other things are predicated of substance. He refers to these, in fact, as figures of predication. And so we talk about quantities of substance or qualities of substance, relations between substances, substances being in a certain position or in a certain state, as doing things, having things done to them. In short, we predicate other things of substances, but substances are the things that aren't predicable of something else. They aren't present in something else. They are the ultimate subjects of predication. So, Aristotle says everything except primary substances is either predicated of primary substances or is present in them, and if these didn't exist, it'd be possible for anything else to exist. If there were no substances, there would be no quantities or qualities or relations or places or times or anything else as well. So, they are most properly called substances because they underlie everything else. As the name suggests, they stance, under, sub, everything else. They are the basic foundation, the basic things the universe consists of. So, he says, the science of substance, understanding substance, must be of the nature of wisdom. If you really want to understand the world at the deepest level, you've got to understand substance. That turns out, however, to be rather difficult. The overall question here is the deepest question, I think, of metaphysics, which is the question of ontology. And Willard Van Orman Quine, a 20th century philosopher, has put this question beautifully at the beginning of one of his papers called On What There Is. A curious thing about the ontological problem is its simplicity. It can be put in 3 Anglo-Saxon monosyllables. What is there? It can be answered, moreover, in a word: everything. And everyone will accept this answer as true. However, this is merely to say there is what there is. There remains room for disagreement over cases. And so the issue has stayed alive down through the centuries. Well, that's precisely right. What is there? Everything. Well, Aristotle's a little more specific than that. What is there? Substance. But what substance? Well, substance is that which is, primarily, not in any qualified sense, but without qualification. It's what exists. That is substance. But We need criteria for figuring out what substance is, and for identifying then the particular things that we take to be the fundamental constituents of the world. Well, all substance, he says, appears to signify that which is individual. It is a this as well as a such. It's an individual thing as well as a thing of a certain kind. Another mark of substance is that it has no contrary. There's no opposite in the way that hot is the opposite of cold, or right is the opposite of left, or being on top of something is the opposite of being under something, or there isn't anything like that with substance. Substance doesn't admit of varying degrees. We don't have something that is more a cat than other things. If you're either a cat or you're not a cat. One cat can't be more cat than another cat. The most distinctive mark of substance, he says, is that it admits contrary qualities. The cat can be awake or asleep. It can be running or it can be staying still. It can be meowing or it can be silent. So here are some criteria. Putting these down in a list, a substance isn't predicable of or present in anything else. It underlies everything else. It's individual, it's of this. It has no contrary. There are no degrees of it. And it admits contrary qualities. It can be changed and undergo a change of quality while remaining the same. Now, what do we mean when we say substance is primary? That's not that easy a question to answer. Aristotle says there are actually several senses in which a thing may be said to be primary or first. Substance, however, is first in every sense. It's first in definition. It's first in order of knowledge, and it's first in time. So let's think first about time. Other categories can't exist independently, only substance. You can't just have the color red floating around independently. It's got to be a red something. You can't just have an action of throwing, for example, without anyone doing the throwing or anything being thrown. And so substance has to be there in order for anything else to exist. If there were no substance, nothing could be thrown, nothing could throw. Nothing could be red, or could be tall, or could be lying over on its side, and so on. And what about first in definition? Well, everything else is a quality of a substance, a relation among substances, quantity of a substance, an action or a state or affection of a substance. So in short, all of those have substance in their very definitions. And what about in the order of knowledge? We know substances most fully and most particularly. He says, here's the way to do it. Think about knowing something. Before you really can know anything else about it, the most important thing to know is, what is it? Okay? What kind of thing is it? Is it a man? Is it fire? Is it a horse? Is it an action? You need to know what kind of thing it is. You need to know what a thing is before you can even start describing it. Surely, first in the order of knowledge is knowing that it's a person, or knowing that it's a book, knowing that it's a table, knowing that it's a vegetable, and so forth. Now, Aristotle says the question raised of old and raised now and always, what is substance? Well, he gives us 4 candidates. And this is interesting because you might have thought, well, wait, we know this already, right? We mean particular things like this book, and then the general kind book, or this particular human being, and then the general kind humanity, or human being. But not so fast. In Metaphysics Zeta, he says there are actually 4 candidates. Well, 4 and question mark. There's really an obvious 5th, which he somehow seems to neglect in the discussion. The word substance is applied, if not in more senses, still at least to 4 main objects. For both the essence and the universal and the genus are thought to be the substance of each thing. And fourthly, the substratum. Now this is quite startling when you see it. Wait a minute, I thought we had particular things and then kinds of thing, that's it. But now we're talking, well, I mean, what happened to the things? What happened to the kinds? We've got genus as a kind type term. Those are the secondary substances of the categories. But we've got essences and universals and the substratum. What's going on here? Well, I thought we were talking about primary substances, individual things, things like this book or this human being. Well, let's go through our criteria. Not predicable of or present to anything else. True. I am not predicable of anything else. Neither is that book. Underlying everything else. Yes, individual things seem to underlie everything else. If there were no individual things, there would be nothing at all, so nothing would have any qualities or relations, and so on. Individual, yes, it's this book, this human being. And so individuality, check. No contrary, right, there's no contrary, nothing that's the opposite of being Dan Bonavac. No degrees, can't be more Dan Bonavac than somebody else. Either you are or you aren't. And the same thing with just being human. You either are or you aren't. Admitting contrary qualities, yes, I can speak, I can be silent, so I can exhibit contrary qualities. The book might be closed, the book might be open, contrary qualities, but primary. Here Aristotle says, wait a minute. I'm looking for the ultimate constituents of the world, the things that are primary in the sense that they are the most basic things. And actually, this book or this human being, they seem composite. There is both the this and the such aspect. They seem to have matter and form. I am this person in this body, in this flesh and blood. I have a certain form, I have an essence. And we'll talk more about what essences are, but certain things are accidental to me. They can change and I remain the same. Other things might be essential to me in that if they change, I am no longer who I am. And so we can talk about my essence, my form, my matter. Ooh, I seem to be composite. But Aristotle says, I'm not talking about composite things now. I want to know what the ultimate constituents of the world are. And these particular things that I took to be primary substances in the categories, they look composite. What are they made up of? What are their ultimate constituents? Maybe they're physical parts, maybe their form, maybe something else. Now we have to investigate. Well, one possibility is the substratum. Okay, so Aristotle says the substratum is that of which everything else is predicated, while it is itself not predicated of anything else. So I think about myself as a human being, and I think, okay, good, humanity is being predicated of me. Human being, that's something like a species, so that's a more general kind of thing. It's a secondary substance, but it's found here in me, a primary substance. But admittedly, I'm not predicated of anything else. I satisfy that criterion. But am I basic? I do seem to have matter, this flesh and blood, and then I have a form in this general shape of a body, but also we can talk about my form in a sort of mental state, talk about my personality or my consciousness or something of that sort. And then I have an essence, things that could not change while I remain the same person. And then you could say, well, let me ask a different question. What or who is it that is Dan Bonavac? After all, we've said, aha, humanity, that gets attributed to Dan Bonavac. Dan Bonavac, well, something here is being Dan Bonavac. What is that thing? Suppose I say, well, it's that flesh and blood. You could say, well, what is it that is that flesh and blood? I don't know what to say about this. And we're going to see this in a number of different philosophers throughout the term. But you might think, okay, look, maybe I mean whatever that ultimate thing is that is Dan Bonavac. So I look at the book and I say, yeah, I'm not talking about the book as the fundamental thing. After all, books are obviously not basic constituents of the universe. They're made up of pages, and those pages contain words. And so it looks as if this book is something that I can't identify as a basic constituent of the universe. There is something that is this book. Let's say it's these pages. Well, there's something that constitutes these pages. What's that? And I can keep pushing down. And so Aristotle thinks maybe there is a substratum here. Maybe here in the end it's the paper, let's say. Or in my case, maybe it really just is the flesh and blood. Or it is the ultimate constituents of my biochemistry. Whatever we end up saying about that. We end up with a substratum that isn't predicable of or present in anything else, that does seem to underlie everything else, but is it individual? It's primary in a way, but the individuality seems disturbing. Let's think about a statue. It's a little easier than thinking about a human being or a book. In one sense, matter is said to be the nature of a substratum. In another, shape, and in a third, the compound of these. By the matter, I mean, for instance, the bronze. By the shape, the pattern of its form, in this case, the cat. And by the compound of these, the statue, the concrete whole. So if I'm looking for ultimate constituents of the universe, well, primary substance, in the terms of the book, the categories, is that sculpture. But now I say, well, that sculpture doesn't really seem primary. So what is it that is that sculpture? It's a certain shape, but what is in that shape? Well, the bronze. Now, later philosophers will say, so what is that bronze? And push it even further. But Aristotle is willing to stop with the bronze, or the paper, or the flesh and blood, etc. In any case, we've got to consider those possibilities. Maybe the ultimate constituent is simply the statue, the whole, the matter and form together, that individual object. That's what he assumes throughout the book, the categories. But it could also be just the matter, just the bronze. It could be just the form, just the shape. So, let's take those in turn. The compound. Could it be the compound of matter and form? That is to say, that matter in that particular shape, that bronze shaped that way. Well, Aristotle says, look, we can easily dismiss that. It's obviously posterior. Its nature is obvious. It is not the basic thing. It's not like you say, what's the basic constituent? Oh, it's this bronze statue of a cat. No, right? Surely that is a compound of the bronze put in that shape. So it's not primary. It's not going to count. What about the matter, the bronze? There in the shape of the cat, here in the shape of the man. Well, is it the bronze that is primary? Aristotle is tempted to go in that direction, but then he says, well, that statement is obscure. On this view, matter becomes substance. If this isn't substance, it baffles us to say what else is. When all else is stripped off, evidently nothing but matter remains. So I look at the sculpture and I say, take away the shape, abstract away from the shape, take away that olive branch behind his ear, take away the nose, take away all of that. What's left? Well, just the bronze. But really, in the end, it's just, well, stuff like bronze. I mean, it might be, right? If we're thinking in terms of chemistry, we might say the ultimate elements. The iron. Actually, bronze is something of a compound there, or a mixture, so really it should be things like, okay, oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, etc. The basic chemical elements, maybe that is what counts as the ultimate constituents of the universe. Or maybe it's the atoms of those, or the microparticles making up those atoms. But in any case, well, nothing but matter is really going to remain, so what's wrong with that? Well, Aristotle says, look, take away length and breadth and depth. There's nothing left unless there's something bounded by these. So, if you consider the matter this way, matter alone must seem to be substance. Well, that would be neither a particular thing, nor a certain quantity, nor assigned to any of the other categories by which it's determined. All those determinations are gone. We can no longer say, oh, it's a statue, or it's a man, or it's a book, or it's anything of any particular kind. It's just the matter in the end. So he says, look, we lose something really important. Maybe we gain some degree of primacy, but we lose other things we cared about. The ultimate substratum would itself be neither a particular thing nor a particular quantity or otherwise positively characterized, nor would it be the negations of these. They would belong to it only by accident. So it would turn out that matter is substance, but hold on a second. We said that being a this such was crucial to substance. Being separable, having its own independent individual existence, being a this. Those are among our criteria too, and matter surely fails that. So that won't work. Matter can't be right. Well, the substratum then satisfies us with respect to being not present in anything else, not being predicable of something else. Underlying everything else, good, but individual? No, it's not individual. It fails that test. What about essence? I do have an essence as a human being. Well, how about that? Is that something that can count? He groups those together under shape, form, the universal. The question of essence is complicated. We'll talk about that separately. But for now, let's just go with this idea that by essence, I mean something like the shape or the form or the universal I exemplify. I mean something like being a human being in my case, or being a book, or maybe being a statue of a cat in that particular shape, or of a Greek goddess, or of an Olympic winner, etc. Shape, you might think, is a universal. So those are coins, all of which are bronze coins, but all of which are in basically the same shape, the same form. Well, can we count the universal, or the shape, or the form as itself substance? Plato, Aristotle thinks, wants to do that. But he says, no, that can't be right. it seems impossible that any universal term should be the name of a substance. Why? Well, the substance of a thing is what is peculiar to it, that doesn't belong to anything else. But the universal is common. A universal is, by definition, something that is multiply instantiated. So, look, it, by its very nature, belongs to more than one thing. There can be more than one human being, more than one triangle, more than one statue, more than one cat. So, where's the individuality? It looks like universals can't be it. And it can't be shape or form or anything like that. We can have lots and lots of different statues produced in a factory with exactly the same shape. Multiply instantiable. So we don't get what's unique. So Aristotle says, well, look, no universal attribute can be a substance. And not only for that reason, because also it is predicable of things. I can say that has the shape of a cat. And that's something that I can predicate of that statue. So it's predicable of other things. It is something that can be in something else. It's multiply instantiable. It flunks a bunch of different tests of substance. It fails our test of not being predicable, but it fails others as well. And so we want to say, look, everything that's common indicates not a this, but a such. But a substance is a this. We agreed that substance was a this such, particular of a certain kind, and a universal isn't like that. It is purely the universal part. Maybe it's an answer to the such part. It is not an answer to the this part. So it fails individuality. Well, what about a kind? We've talked about that as a secondary substance in the categories, and so we might look at it and say, well, maybe Aristotle's changed his mind by the time he gets to metaphysics. Maybe he's decided the secondary is really primary, and we should be talking about kinds, about general sorts or types of thing. But look, that doesn't work either. It's predicable of something else. I am a human being, for example. That animal is a cat. That is a book. It also fails individuality, because after all, it's a this such, this human being. The kind is giving you the such, not the this. So we summarize and we say, well, we've looked at now 5 possibilities. Is it an individual thing? It looks like that's compound, it's not primary. Matter? It's not individual. What about shape or form or universal? It's predicable and it's not individual. What about a kind? It's predicable, it's not individual. What about the combination of matter and form? Well, now we're back to the individual thing. It's compound, it's not primary. So in the end, I think Aristotle thinks nothing on that list really satisfies everything we wanted about the nature of substance. We went thinking, look, I've got a very intuitive idea. What is the basic structure of the world? Let's look at the structure of language and the structure of thought. Everything is really about, in the end, well, in language, nouns. It's about persons, places, things. It's about individual objects, individual people, individual things. But then we look and we say, wait a minute, I wanted it to be, yes, individual, but also primary and not compound, something that underlies everything else. I wanted it to be having the ability to admit contrary qualities, but to have no contrary itself, and so on and so forth. I didn't want it to be composite. I wanted it to be simple and basic. And it turns out I can't have it all. I can either go with the compound, but hey, in other respects satisfying things, that is to say, the matter plus form, the individual thing, or I can go with some element like the essence or the shape, form, universal, matter, kind, and then I'm going to have to give up the idea that this is not predicable. I'll have to give up the idea of individuality. I will have to surrender my conception that substance is a this such. I have a big price to pay no matter what. So in short, the moral seems to be this. Nothing satisfies all the criteria for being a substance. Well, that's disappointing. And so Aristotle, in a kind of summary, says, well, look, what do we really in the end do then? If we can't have everything, what do we settle for? Here's what we settle for. We call substance, first of all, the simple bodies. Like the elements, in other words, earth, air, fire, water, everything of that sort. But also the individual things composed of them, bodies, books, human beings, and so forth. All those are called substance because they're not predicated of a subject. Everything else is predicated of them. So in short, we refer to both the basic elements and then the things made up out of those elements, the compounds, the individual objects, the individual people. Those are substances. They satisfy at least some of the criteria for being a substance. We sometimes refer to substance as a principle or even a cause and pursue it from that starting point, he says. So sometimes we focus on the cause. And here we're looking towards something like an essence, like the soul of an animal or a human being. And we think about a person's mind, let's say, and we think of that as something like a substance. It's not a material substance, but nevertheless, it's something like the cause of the motion of the material substance. And so sometimes we extend it in that direction too. Then we talk about the parts of things. Okay, so there's me, this human being, but then there's also this hand and this hair and those eyes and so forth, the various parts of me, and then ultimately, of course, the individual atoms, the individual microparticles that make me up. So those are, in a different sense, substance. And then finally, he says, the essence. Who am I really? You might think, what is my essence? What is really the essence of being Dan Bonnevak? Or, what is this? It's a book. Well, what is it to be a book? I'm looking for the essence of book. So maybe the best answer to what it is ultimately an explanation of the essence of the thing. We call that substance too. So in short, we have a variety of criteria. Does anything meet all those criteria? No. But we settle. And we settle in various ways. Sometimes we refer to substances as the individual things. Sometimes to the elements out of which they're composed. Sometimes to the parts out of which they're composed. Sometimes to something like the cause, the mind, the soul. Sometimes we actually refer to, well, gosh, the kind. After all, there are secondary substances. We refer to a bunch of different things. So in the end, he says, and you might think he's going to say, so substance has 4 senses or something. He gives us 2, really, because of those criteria. He tells us, look, we either choose the substratum, the thing that is basic, but forces us to lose the individuality part. So we think about the basic elements, for example, or the bronze. We think about that type of thing where we basically preserve the underlying everything else, but we lose the individuality part. Or we think about the individual things, the thises, whether it's the whole thing or the parts of the thing, this part, this hand, and so on. Those things we can also take. But then we lose some sense of primacy because they're compounds. So we can't have it all. We settle. We either say, well, this satisfies most of the criteria, I have to give up the individuality part. Or we say, well, it satisfies most of the criteria, but I have to give up the primacy part. In the end, we settle because we can't have everything. So we look at the sculpture, and sometimes we say, what is that? It's bronze. Sometimes, what is that? A child reading a book. Sometimes we say, what is that? Well, it consists of several parts. There is the child, there is the base of it, there is the book and the individual things that are marked so that they look like pages. In short, we do lots of different things to answer questions like, what is that? Because, well, there is no one simple way to understand what substance really is.